Kia ora Reikura.
Tēnā koutou, ke ngā maunga, ke ngā ua, ke ngā waka, ke ngā paringa tai tangata nau mai. Kia tahuri o tātou whakaaro ki te wāhi ngaro. He korori hei maunga rongo ki te whenua he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa arohaina ngā tēnā me ngā tuakana. Ke ngā tūpuna i te pō kei te wāhi ngaro. Kia tau iho te tō mairangi ata whai ki te runga i te tōtau. Airiki nui, kuini ngā waihona i te pō, te kahui ariki. Kia tau hoki o ringa ata whai. Ki runga i te hunga e māwiwi ana, e noho tūroro ana. I ngā pākainga, i ngā marae maha, kei ngā tōpito katoa. Mā koutou e pakamana mai e nei inoi a mātou. Kia piki te ora, piki te kaha, piki te māramatanga. Tūturu e rangi, tūturu e papa, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e, ike, tai ki e.
Tai ki e. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe e Reikura. Tēnā tātou katoa, ngā mihi nui, ngā mihi aroha ki a koutou, ko Waio, ko no Ngāti Rangi Nui, Ngāti Haua, Ngāti Hine, Ngāti Hakuahau, ko Sharon, Shea tōku ingoa, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to those of you who are on global shores, and welcome to everyone who are on our local shores. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce this inaugural session in terms of the global conference today, Te Tiriti and the Future. Thank you so much everyone for being part of our hui today, and we really look forward to sharing the wisdom and the whakaaro of our beautiful, esteemed speakers in this session. Just in terms of our kaupapa today, everyone, there is a code associated with our mahi today, and I'm going to get our team just to share that code very quickly. That code is also on the website. Would you please have a look at that at some stage? But generally speaking, this is about uplifting the mana of everyone who is in our space and in future spaces. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou. And just in terms of the earlier slide, if the team could put that back on, that's just about letting everyone know that we're making sure and working hard that everyone is able to participate in the sessions for the duration of this conference. So please know that we have captions, and also there's an opportunity to view transcripts. And as you can see there are other links for everyone to use should you wish to. So ngā mihi, thank you for that. Just in terms of our flow, everybody, what we're going to do is, because I know that everyone is so excited to hear what our esteemed speakers have to say today, we're going to roll into our first speaker, Tai Hākure. And I wanted to let you know that all of our speaker profiles are online as well. So I won't be introducing our speakers today because you can have a look at their profiles online, and please could you do so, because they are amazing people for us to listen to today. But we will start with Tai Hākure, and then Ta will be followed by Reikura, and then Reikura will be followed by Dame Areta Koopu, and then we will round up today with Kathie Irwin, and then I'll come back on if we have time. Everybody, we will do some Q&A, but if we don't have time, then I will wrap up, and then you can stay online and enjoy the rest of the day. So ngā mihi again for participating today. Thank you so much everyone, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to all of you Tai Hākure, Eta, Sir, please, we are looking forward to your kōrero. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi kia koe hoki, Sharon. Sharon, we've got only 14 years to go, and it will be the 200th year of the treaty. And so what I wanted to do is to just look back to how it was 100 years prior, back to February of 1940. And coincidentally, that is also the time when I was born. I was 19 days old in February 1940. So I'm able to give a personal account of the intervening years, which I thought I would do. If I go back to 1940, at that time, the treaty was on the lips of all of our marae speakers back at our home marae of Aorangi. We talked about it, but I think no one would ever have imagined that in time it would be equally on the lips of community leaders throughout the country. That's the big sign of progress for me. Most Māori at that time did not know how they came to be dispossessed of their land. In some places that was clear cut, but in my district, no one really seemed to know how it all happened. But today, every hapu has access to the reports of the historians and of the tribunal. You can read all about it. Everyone has easy access to what happened in the past. At that time also, as some of you will recall, Dame Areta included, the news in Māori was confined to 10 minutes per week at 6 p.m. on a Sunday when Bill Parker gave us the news in Māori. Mm-hmm. Today, we have our own radio stations, we have our own TV channels. In 1940, Māori customary fisheries were not recognised. Today, we have a major stake in the national fishing industry. And in the 1940s, officials told us with great clarity that the treaty could never be part of the law of the land, and today it is. So that's a sort of sampling, I think, of some of the big changes that have happened. And the thing is that we did it. And when I say we did it, I mean the communities across the country. So that it's a reminder to us that whereas in the 1940s, all the power came from the top down, today we can see that the power comes from the bottom up. It comes from the people. So going back then to those early days and how it was that we got the treaty into law, my recollection is that in the 1970s, I was working with Sehenari Ngata on the reform of Māori land law. And at that time, in 1972, Sehenari published with the New Zealand Māori Council his paper on the laws that contravene the Treaty of Waitangi. And that, I think, provided the opening. The opening could, for the treaty to come into law, could be by that route of the laws that contravene the treaty. So I was a judge of the Māori Land Court when in 1974 rather, Matiu Rata, as Minister of Māori Affairs, put out his proposals for the recognition of the treaty in law. Mat Rata was one of the most astute ministers. I would actually think that in that period from 1940 onwards, he was probably the smartest of all of our ministers of Maori affairs. He was only in office for 3 years, but in that time, he put through an extraordinary amount of legislation, the reform of Maori land law, and of course included in it the Treaty of Waitangi. He got back a number of the lands that had been given over for schools by the people of the East Coast. He got the lands back to Maori ownership. He got Mount Taupiri back to Maori ownership. He got the Whāako lands returned to Tūwharetoa Ngāti Kahungunu. He did an amazing amount for such a short time, and of course he got through the Treaty of Waitangi Act in 1975. The problem that he had in the time was that he was a little bit ahead of everybody else, and his cabinet, the Bill Rowling cabinet, was not quite with him. And to get the matter through, he had to bring on one very influential person. That was Martin Finlay, QC, and the Attorney General and Minister of Justice at the time, a brilliant chap, a chap who took the French government to court in The Hague before the International Court of Justice over nuclear testing in the Pacific. Matt knew he had to bring him on board. And so he did what the sort of thing that he would normally do in such a situation. He got on board with that in a very physical way. He hopped on board the Vega, which became the Greenpeace 3, and sailed into the nuclear testing zone. And Bill Rowling and Martin Finlay found it very hard to resist Matt. He just had a way of bringing people on. But Matt would not, Martin would not move. He still felt that we would be opening Pandora's box. So the next thing that happened was we had the land march that came down, and that changed everything. So I think when we look back to how did the treaty get into law, we'd have to say it was the protesters who clinched it. It had an enormous effect. Well, unfortunately, the government went out of office almost immediately after that. They got the legislation through, but they were unable to get the first appointments through. And it was some years before the national government, when it came in, it was some years before they would make those appointments. But we eventually got it off the ground. And I think I would especially have to acknowledge in that we had some really outstanding lawyers who were able to put that through. In those days, there were not many lawyers who appeared before the Waitangi Tribunal. It was very much a people's court, but we had two lawyers who knew how to sit in the back and let the Maori people run the case themselves, and then come in at the end with these brilliant closing addresses. And these were Sir David Baragwanath and Dame Sharon Elias. Sir David would end up as president of the, in The Hague, as president of the court on Lebanon. I understand he's still over there at The Hague. And Dame Sharon would later become Chief Justice and has recently retired from there. But these were the people who not only managed those cases at the beginning, but then shifted it into the High Court. Sorry, it was called the Supreme Court in those days, but now the High Court. And eventually before the Court of Appeal. And once the Court of Appeal made its first decision in 87, with Robin Cook as leading the court at that time, I think that's when we really clinched it. So there has been the lawyers, and there has been this remarkable body of politicians who then came in behind the treaty. I had a note of all their names somewhere, but can't quite pick it up. But I think I would particularly have to remember, sorry, no, thought I had it on here. There were a series of politicians who came in who have supported the tribunal from both parties over many, many years. Right back in the days of Rob Muldoon, everyone thought that he was very much opposed to the treaty. He, in fact, adopted more recommendations from the Waitangi Tribunal than any government has done since. Bill Birch, who made the changes to the Big Think projects in order to accommodate the tribunal's recommendations. Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who then came in and introduced into law those provisions that made particular reference to the principles of the treaty. And that was the avenue by which David Baragwanath and Sharon Elias were then able to move the cases, the lands case, before the Court of Appeal. I can't remember the names of the others who came in there, but my point is that what happened with the Treaty of Waitangi was that a number of people, from protesters through to academics, historians, have all managed to move the treaty through. It has been a process undertaken by many, but most of all, I think it was the people in the communities themselves who were able to make that change. Why could they do that? I think the fundamental point about the Treaty of Waitangi was that it was a statement about human rights made in 1840 when the Whig government was in office in Britain and when the humanitarian movement was just starting. They picked up on the fundamental right of Indigenous peoples on the development of colonies, following the 1830 report to the government on the plight of Indigenous people in colonized countries. So New Zealand was founded on the expression of certain fundamental human rights. And that's what I think makes us as a country unique. Most countries were founded upon wars or simply the exercise of force and power, but ours was founded upon human rights principle. And I think that is the key element for us today.
It's with great sorrow that I need to wrap you up, sir.
I'm very happy to be wrapped up, Sharon.
With great sorrow.
Lovely, lovely.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and I wish we had all day to talk to you Sir Durie. But ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Yeah.
And I know you'll be here just in case we get a bit of time for Q&A, but I know it's going to be a little bit tough for us because we've got 3 mana wāhine coming up and we all want to hear what they have to say. So ngā mihi ki a koe, Sir Durie. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to Reikura, Reikura Kahi. Kia ora Reikura, ngā mihi, over to you.
Tēnā koutou, e te papa, tātai hakure Durie, e tino mihi ana ki au kōrero ki au tuku ihotanga mai kia tātou. I would happily have given my time to you, but here I am. And I'll just start off initially. Nani Areta, Dame Areta, rang me last year and said, "Dear, I need you to do this presentation with me. And everybody knows, do not say no to Dame Areta." So here I am. And we're talking about consolidating pathways. And when I talk about this, it's really down to my nanny, Letty Brown, who was the driving force in our whānau. And I mean driving force in that she established Wāhine Waititi Marae, which is the marae you see in this photo. And it's an urban marae in West Auckland. And her, along with Papa Pita, Tāpita Sharples and Whaaroha Painga, were the main community leaders within West Auckland at that time. So all of these tamariki that you see in front of the marae, including my brother and I, were the benefactors of their tireless efforts to establish not only the marae, but also the kōhangareo kura kaupapa Māori, wharekura o Wāhine Waititi. And I'm among, my brother and I, among the first wave of graduates of kōhangareo kura kaupapa and wharekura, thanks to my nan. And my nan now has retired, and she's 88 and only retired 4 years ago. So she is that typical community leader, Māori leader, like Tātai Hakure and Nani Areta, that do not really retire, but keep on with the fight. And that fight is for te reo Māori, ngā tikanga, and for us as Māori and the generations to come. And my grandmother made the intentional move to only speak Māori to my brother and I, and then also to all my cousins. So all of us have come through kōhangareo, kura kaupapa, and wharekura. And she only spoke Māori to us. She unfortunately didn't speak Māori to her, to my mother and her tamariki, but that decision to only speak Māori to us has changed our lives. And what you see here is consolidating pathways. And little did I know when I was 6 years old that we had many, many community leaders come through my nan's whare. And me and my brother spent a lot of time with my nan. We had Nani Titi Whai Harawira, Nani Hanata Hemara, Korosa Jackson, all of them come through my nan's house, have lengthy hui. And what I didn't know at that time is that they were constellating pathways. They were charting a course to eventually get us, my generation, to a point where we were not without our language and not without tikanga. And growing up on Wāhine Waititi Marae, we weren't without any of that. We knew everything you need to do in marae. At kura, we were doing all the pōwhiris, all the mōteatea, setting up the beds, washing the dishes, and that was part of what school life was for us. And I'm sure at the time, some of the parents were a bit worried that we were at the marae too much. And the marae was basically 30 seconds away from the kōhangareo, 30 seconds away from the kura, and even less from the wharekura. So every day, and like my tamariki, who are at the kura at the moment, they know that their number one job is manaakitanga. And manaakitanga, whether it be a pōwhiri, whether it be to farewell the mene mate that lay on our marae, or to host yet another delegation from overseas or from another rohe, or even the many governments that have come through and been welcomed onto Wāhine Waititi Marae. And that was a childhood that I had. So when Tā Tai Hakure talks about the treaty on Wāhine Waititi Marae, I was never without. I never knew that the language was under threat. I never knew that my mana Māori was under threat because I had it all. And that was because of my kaimātua, my grandmother, and the many whānau that had parents, and many of my friends didn't have Māori-speaking parents. So all our kaimātua on the marae were our kaiako. And those kaimātua were from all around, whether it be from Tairāwhiti, Taitokerau, Meningāpuhi and West Auckland, or Taranaki, o Ngāti Kahungunu. So we learned all their waiata because our marae is a marae for ngā hauewha, ngā waka katoa, ngā maunga, ngā awa. And so when we talk about, or when I talk about consolidating pathways, that's what I mean, is that they were intentional and they were, my grandmother and the many community leaders within West Auckland were consolidating pathways for us to benefit by. Next slide. And when we move on to fortifying pathways. So at Kura, our first principle was Katerina te hei kōkō mataira. One of the most amazing kaiako you could ever have as a 6-year-old or 5-year-old. But the Kura was established when I was 6. So a lot of the tamariki coming through were definitely many of them didn't have te reo Māori in the kāinga. So Whaia Katerina was that person for us who at Kura told these amazing stories, highly creative stories that she had created for her tamariki. And all our puka puka, and we didn't know this at the time, but we, all our puka puka all had stickers all over them because Whaia Katerina had translated all of these Pākehā English books for kids for us in Māori. So at that time, there were no puka puka in Māori, but she created them for us. And so again, I have to say that we were never without because we had all her puka puka. And if you, look at the many puka puka that she had that she has translated for Huia publishers and other publishers, there are many. And it is because of her. She fortified that pathway. And I mean fortifying in terms of she protected us from a world that we didn't realise didn't value our reo, didn't value our tikanga, and didn't value us as tamariki in the need for us to speak Māori at Kura, to be taught in Māori at Kura. And that's what our kaiako did for us. They were our protectors, and they enforced that fortifying, in order for us to be the generation who was given everything and to maintain and to sustain us. They needed to protect us from everybody else. Waho atu, outside of our little bubble that I would say in West Auckland on Wāhine Waititi Marae. So Whaia Katerina te hei kōkō mataira was that for us. She gave us everything she had. And generations to come, we have many teachers and all kura kaupapa all around Aotearoa who do the same for their tamariki. So that journey for us never really was about te tiriti o Waitangi, or toi tū te tiriti, or toi tū te reo. It just was. And for the first wave, we were the ones to pass on and to fortify the pathway for our tamariki. Next slide. And so my brother and I, and the first wave of graduates, Reikura, from Wāhine Waititi, established this kapahaka group, Ngātu Manako. And in 2019, we won Te Matatini in Wellington. And it's never been about winning for us. We had tāpita, and manutaki was on our marae, and there were practices every Thursdays, and we all went to that practice, and we all were a part of manutaki at one point. And some of our tamariki are still in manutaki, but they are also in Ngātu Manako. And Ngātu Manako was established as a way of maintaining an environment outside of our marae where we could speak Māori, compose our own songs. And through those songs, be who we were made to be or nurtured to be by whaakatarina te hei kōkō, by tāpita and whaaroha pānga. Everything that we do is for te reo, ngā tikanga, and my brother and I are the tutors and composers. So all our waiata always come back to our marae, to our whare, Ngātu Manako, and to our elders, and those also who have passed. And it's like Tā Tipene said, remember to remember, and we always remember. We always remember tukui hotanga, the intergenerational transmission from our kaumātua to us, and the need to be resilient. And now that we're adults and we have our own tamariki, and some of us have mokopuna, we understand the efforts and the hard work and the fighting that my grandmother did for us and my parents continue to do for us. And all the kaiako, e ngā kura kaipapa katoa, ngā kura Māori, what they do for their tamariki and their whānau. Because it's always about community, it's always about whānau, iwi hapu, and it's always about our tamariki and what we can pass on to them. So it's setting the pathways within our tamariki so they understand that they can be whoever they want to be, and that te reo Māori me ngā tikanga will always be with them and they will never be without. Next slide. So this is my beautiful grandmother. She lives in West Auckland, Letty Brown, and she is with my youngest daughter and my nephew. And we go over every week. My brother stays right next door to her, and my cousins stay right next door on the other side, and my other cousin stays inside with her and her buddy. And then I've got another cousin who stays in her front garage. So we have surrounded her, and surrounded her sometimes with a lot of problems, but also surrounding her with aroha. And we always hope that we can give her as much as she has given us. And so our koha to her is ensuring that our mokopuna, her mokopuna tuarua, her great-grandchildren, spend as much time with her as they can. And we're over there having kai with her, we're over there annoying her when she wants to watch the news, and she's telling us, hey, I've got whakata Māori on, so I need to watch the news. And so, but regardless, we will sit through the news and talk to her, because she knows, as she did with us, with her mokopuna, that her mokopuna tuarua love hearing her speak Māori to them. They always look through her photos, because she is surrounded by photos, and they always ask the same photo. Nanny, is that you? Were you Māori Woman of the Year? and they love the story. So to end this kōrero, I go back to Tā Tipene Regan and what he said, remember to remember. And we always remember those who have given us everything. And for us, the first wave of Wāhanga Reo, Kura Kaupapa Māori, and Whare Kura, we have received everything and more. And due to their efforts, whether it be, like my nan was in the youth courts with Sharon, and then she had a halfway home for Māori women in Ponsonby, and the many kapa that she helped establish and the many marae that she helped, that she supported within West Auckland and wider Auckland, we only hope to do a quarter of what she did back when she was a young mother and then a grandmother and now a great-grandmother to her mokopuna. So tā tai hākure, Nani Areta, by Kathie. I thank you for this time, and especially to those who run this kōrero. I thank you also for your efforts. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Reikura, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Good news, everyone. We've got a little bit of extra time for our session, and we have two other esteemed speakers. So I'm going to invite Dame Areta Koopu. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe.
Yeah, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe tā iri. Tēnā koe Reikura. Pai te rongo ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou I roto o tātou taumahatanga o tātou aitua ko tangihia. Nō reira tātou te hungora, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko wai au. I te taha tōku māma, ko puke hāpopo te maunga, ko waiamo ko te awa, ko waho rangi, rawa ko whitirea ngā whare nui. Ko whangarā te marae, ko Ngāti Kaunohi me te aitanga hauiti ngā iwi. I te taha o taku pāpa, ko pēria te kāinga, Ngāti Kahu te hapu, te taitukirau te iwi. Ko Kahurangi Areta Koopu tōku ingoa. I've greeted you all and acknowledged those who have all lost, we have all lost, and acknowledge you all as being present. I acknowledge my parents and their origins, and I am Dame Areta Koopu. When I was asked to speak at this anti-racism conference last year, I was amazed and encouraged to be given the opportunity to think about who I wanted to share this session with, and also to think about my own journey for a while with the treaty. And I became very aware of the treaty really in my adult life. This awareness was demonstrated while living in the South Pacific. So let me take a step back. I was born and raised in Turanga, Gisborne, to a Māori whānau of 7, 6 girls and 1 brother during the early 1940s. On the East Coast at that time, my parents and elders were very strong followers of our leader, Te Apirana Ngata. Not only was he significant to the East Coast, he was a renowned Māori leader in Aotearoa and a member of Parliament. My parents were participants in supporting his Consolidation Act of Māori land and also his encouragement for us as youth to take up the teachings of the Pākehā with our heart, but with our hearts and minds, remember the teachings of our elders. This is clearly written in history and captured by the verse he wrote in a young girl's autograph book. I believe she was the daughter of the late Sir John Bennett, E Tipu E Reo. And I'll leave you all to look that up in your own time. My parents constantly drilled into us, we must do very well at school. They took for granted the constant trips made to our marae at the weekends as a constant reminder of being Māori. Significant things I remember on our marae, the songs, the poi, the haka, and pātere. These told us who we were and where we came from. My nannies and aunties were always asking us to speak Pākehā so they could hear it. Of course, they replied in Māori or broken English. We grew up knowing the ways of the marae culture and with respect for our elders. At 21, I married and left Gisborne. My husband, Hoira, was from Te Whānau Apanui, a fluent Māori speaker, educated at Te Aote Boys College. We had 5 children, 5 mokopuna, and 3 mokopuna tuarua. Hoira passed away in 2005. He was a land surveyor, and in 1967-1970, we moved to Apia, Western Samoa, to work with the Samoan government. To me, their culture and language was enriching and enlightening. I experienced firsthand Samoans running their own country. Shops, banks, garages, all had Samoan staff and leaders. Every June 1st to the 3rd, they celebrated Independence Day from the New Zealand government. I admired the Samoans for running their own country, and when I looked at the South Pacific Islands, Tonga, Fiji, and Rarotonga, for instance, they were all in charge of their lands, language, and culture. At the end of our tour, we returned to Rotorua, and my children went to the local primary school, where I attended my first PTA meeting. And the hot topic, was, should we allow Māori to be taught in schools? I was flabbergasted. The rest is history. I became a marriage and family counsellor with New Zealand Marriage Guidance on our return. I also discovered I was the second Māori to join this organisation. The training was extramural and thorough. It was for all who sought counselling. Even though our training was for everyone, I knew Māori would be different. As happened once Māori knew there was a Māori counsellor. Hang on. Yeah, once they knew that there was one there, they came, but they came as whānau, and they talked about their whakapapa and their whānau, or where they lived or had lived. To me, this made sense. It was like a hui. I was thrilled for them to all come, especially if they were willing. For instance, a common dispute was one partner being from a different tribe or area. This made life difficult for the couple, and it often turned out it was based on historic issues or stories they had been told and not checked. Because it was told by the elders, they believed it. I understood this issue, and once we found common ground and explored how to adapt to their own ideas, they moved on. I could say more about this, but not in this forum. Because of this situation, I became very aware that my colleagues were concerned that I was not trained to do family counselling, or that I could have been in danger being alone in the room. This never occurred to me, and I was in my element, seeing Māori using the service. I realised my colleagues didn't really understand me, and I didn't understand that everyone had to be the same. This further awakened my awareness that there were differences, so I had to find a way of sharing my culture with my colleagues. They were the majority and my seniors. I knew my place. At times like this, there is always one who will understand and want to know more. My friend Mary Irvine, born on the East Coast in Te but living in Rotorua, understood, and we became staunch friends. So we held small parties in her garden, my garden, as well as others, especially on Waitangi Day. We invited friends, and discussion was on all aspects of the treaty, Te Treaty. In a town like Rotorua, it became obvious that Pākehā knew about us, but had little or no contact. In contrast, Rotorua Māori were different. Because of colonisation and constant contact with tourism and tourists, they conversed easily, but my friends hardly knew Māori words. These gatherings were a wonderful awakening for us as a group. What worked? We now knew, as long as we talked and developed Te Treaty, the treaty, as a main topic, understandings of how it bound us to Aotearoa New Zealand. It allowed us to live together as Māori and Pākehā. During the 1970s in Rotorua, there was an awareness that Māori were beginning to make noisy statements about being Māori, Indigenous. We were challenging politics, language, education, etc. We were now reaching government ears, local politics, and churches. This was a new era, as not many Pākehā had addressed Māori issues or were unaware if there were any issues, or was there any need to address them. At the same time, I became involved in the Māori Women's Welfare League, where I came face to face with not only the needs of Māori, but the needs and place of Māori women in Māori and Pākehā society at that time. Māori housing was poor as more and more Māori were moving from the country to the cities. In 1954, the first Māori housing survey was carried out in Auckland by the Māori Women's Welfare League. Māori health inequities were highlighted, and in 1974, a Māori health research project, totally designed, surveyed, and analysed by Māori Women's Welfare League, was conducted and reported. Māori society was on the move. 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal was set up by the then government. Grievances were being heard, settlements were being settled. Healing was beginning, but still more had to be done. 1980, Māori were asking and demanding that the Ministry of Education provide our mokopuna tamariki with education in their own language. Welcome to Kahurangi plus their Ātairangi learning courses. These preschools had to be set up with fluent Māori speakers and our nannies. Parents began taking lessons at education and other institutions. Within a few years, the language flourished, beginning with our mokopuna and mokopuna tuarua. The treaty was brought to help us develop as people, living together under the same kaupapa. Te tiriti was a translation of all clauses so Māori could take part to redevelop for the future. Though we still have a long way to go, maybe organisations like this and others will work with us to make this a truly bicultural country. Now, this is another wake-up call, of course, as many argue today that Aotearoa New Zealand has become multicultural. Of course, I would be the first to support other cultures coming here. There's a richness in all those cultures, but the founding document of Aotearoa New Zealand is Te Tiriti, a treaty, which joined us to the British Empire and made us partners into the future. New settlers are welcome, but an education program has to be held so they understand how important Te Tiriti, the treaty, is to Aotearoa New Zealand society. Many new settlers understand this journey and say they too have gone through their own journeys for independence from other colonizing powers. This is my story, or a glimpse of how Te Tiriti has impacted and influenced my life. And this has been my pleasure. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Dame Kōpu. Again, what a pleasure to be able to hear your whakaaro and share your wisdom with us all today. Ngā mihi nui, ngā mihi aroha ki a koe. I'm going to move now, everyone, to Kathie Irwin. Kathie, kia ora and welcome.
Kia rangatira mā, ngā kaumātua o ngā hauewha, nau mai tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. To our beautiful speakers who have already delivered their kauhau, ngā mihi aroha mō te māramatanga o ngā kupu. I'm going to bring a different view to this kōrero today. I'm going to take us back to the orokohanga. I'm going to start this kōrero in our creation story. And I'm doing that because in our world, 1840 is a long way away from the beginning of time, from the beginning of our story. And we start in that place in a piece of work, a tool that's been developed to end women's homelessness in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for a couple of really strong reasons. Firstly, my nanny, Hori Areta Koopu, born the sixth of 19 children in 1899, at a time when politicians thought Māori were destined to die out. Mercifully, our tipuna didn't have the same view, and of course flourishing and thriving and holding history to account was always in their hearts and in their actions. So she was born into a society that really had little vision for her other than to be a woman of servitude, a woman of low rank, a person whose mana was linked to satisfying the needs of others. Well, guess what? That wasn't on her radar. And as a 14-year-old, she went to her father. The Presbyterian community had arrived in Nuhaka. They had a secondary school in Turakina. She had already decided that education was the key to her future. And she went to her father and proposed that in order to get into Turakina, she would need to leave home, change her religion and go to the other side of the country. Pretty big thing to ask of your parents as a 14-year-old, but that's exactly what she did. Enrolled in Turakina in 1915 as the 149th pupil, became the Dux in 1917 and took up her first teaching role in 1918, creating a professional pathway through education for herself, for her siblings and for the generations to follow her. Fast forward to 2024 and the Human Rights Commission Pacific Pay campaign around pay equity identified that the critical variable for wahine Māori in economic development and in welfare, cultural welfare, social welfare, the ability to live as a tangata whenua partner to Te Tiriti and Aotearoa, the critical factor for Māori women in that pay equity space is education. My grandmother saw that in 1914 and charted a way forward for many generations of her own descendants to exercise the rangatiratanga through education in our own terms. So bringing the work today, and I'm conscious we've lost our slides, I'm not sure why, bringing this presentation here today is honouring her legacy. It is understanding the impact that being able to live as a wahine Māori in Aotearoa on our own terms, on our own whenua, through Te Tirohanga Māori, our own worldview, is both a treaty right and it's also one of our epistemological opportunities. So we start in that space because one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment is in the area of women's homelessness. And in 2024, the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness found through their research that 50% of the homeless whānau in Aotearoa were women. 50%. And a third of those women are wahine Māori. How can that be? How can our worldview hold us as whare tangata, the sacred house of humanity, and yet in 2024, a third of the homeless wahine in Aotearoa were wahine Māori? How can that happen? We're going to tell you a little story about that. Thank you. Second slide. So the piece of work we're working on is called the Papatūānuku paradigm, and we start in Papatūānuku, the Earth Mother, because that honours te orokohanga. We start in the creation story because in our worldview, the whenua came before humanity. So we start long before the treaty itself in 1840. We start the storytelling at the beginning. The Papatūānuku paradigm is a gender analysis tool from a Te Ao Māori worldview designed and commissioned by the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness, in Aotearoa. Thank you. Third slide. In the Papatūānuku paradigm, Te Tiriti or Waitangi is a founding design principle, and it's a founding design principle because when we move to the furthest out strategic visioning, Aotearoa, what Te Taurewhiri o Te Reo Māori has coined as our nation-building context, when we take that very long strategic view, mai te orokohanga, from the creation story, ki Aotearoa, to the strategic nation-building future that Te Tiriti always envisaged, when we take that very long view, the link in this work that is critical is Te Tiriti or Waitangi ushered in the machinery of government. It opened the door to the creation of the public policy machine, the bureaucracy that would become the greatest vehicle of colonisation in Aotearoa. And that's a critical point of understanding the impact of Te Tiriti on our lives. The machinery of government itself is the vehicle through which our colonisation was manifest in fundamentally devastating, structurally designed ways to dislodge us from our own whenua, from our own reo, and from our own tikanga. Ping! Next slide, please. The tool has 9 design principles, and if you look at the chart on the left, they are read left to right, top to bottom. So the first design principle, as we've just talked, is worldview or epistemology. What is the knowledge system itself that underpins our work, and in this context also the application in the machinery of government? Second principle is Te Tiriti and the treaty. So you will notice the treaty does not come first in our work. That is way later down the track. Starting in the worldview allows the characteristics of our mātauranga, our own pūrākau, to frame the story and to create the critical features of it. For example, our knowledge code is sacred, collective, and read bottom up, whereas the public policy system that came in after our worldview framed our existence here in Aotearoa has contrasting characteristics, as Justice Joe Williams has shared through his research and scholarship. It is secular in the public system, not sacred. It is individual in its philosophical design and whakapapa, not collective. And it is read and has impact top down, not bottom up. So to Justice Williams' point in his work, the clash of the codes is fundamental to understanding how the machinery of government, positioned by Te Tiriti of Waitangi, has created the structural inequity that we live with as Māori today. The third design principle is strategic, which I've just referred to. The fourth design principle is about unpacking the role and impact of the public policy machine, the machinery of government itself. Policy, legislation, regulation, that is the vehicle through which colonisation was visited upon us. We look then at kaupapa Māori, the way in which our people have resisted colonisation, the resilience that we have used to be able to draw from te orokohanga, ngā taonga tuku iho, the old ancient ways of our own people to be able to chart new ways forward. Kaupapa Māori, both an understanding of the conscientisation process of Māori as we have resisted colonisation and designed our own pathways forward, and a social movement. We've just had a most eloquent, beautiful koho from our previous speaker who was able to link back into her narrative and experience of Hoani Waititi Marae. Beautiful ability to be able to set that social movement in a context of pūrākau a whānau, pūrākau a marae, and pūrākau a kaupapa, so mihi atu. We come across then to the sixth design principle, which explores the context of Māori Crown relations. And you'll see in that there are two silhouetted faces which don't touch. So in our tradition, the critical meeting point is the hongi, the sharing of one breath. In this diagram, the noses don't touch. And the point about that is the crown has so many faces. It's not always easy for our people to recognise which is the face they need to hongi to be able to engage with the crown. We come down to the bottom line, and te whare tangata and the ability for te whare tangata to enable us to theorise intersectionality and the impact of te tīmiti and social issues on our people from a mana wahine lens, from a particular gender diversity view, and a way of being able to read intersectionality, not from the top down. You know about the impact of capitalism, colonisation and patriarchy as the three systems of power relations that have come from an international context top down. We know that story. We can tell that story through other people's writings, and we can see the common experience that other jurisdictions have had of those three experiences. But our response as wahine Māori in Aotearoa from the bottom up, which is why this work is called the Papatūānuku paradigm, from the Papatūānuku perspective up, reads through resistance and also through our ability not only to resist, but to show resilience in a way through whānau hapuaniwi that is deeply connected to the orokohanga, the Māori knowledge base and knowledge code, never extinguished by colonisation, despite what the Crown will argue. How could it be that Te Kohanga Reo was a model able to be gifted to the world if, in fact, our traditions had been fully and finally extinguished by colonisation? And then the eighth design principle is the Māori cultural infrastructure itself. So regardless of the way in which the machinery of government will position itself as the most dominant feature of our lives, not even. So it is critically a feature of our life, but it is not the dominant feature that has extinguished our taonga tuku iho, the ability of our people to resist and to be resilient from our own worldview, bringing through the beautiful lessons of our tipuna. My grandmother is a 14-year-old who said, "You have no vision for me, Aotearoa, as a young Māori woman educator, then you need to step aside because I have that vision for myself and I will pursue the pathway. I will create the pathway. I will build the pathway so that my uri can follow me, not you, not your aspirations for me, because you have none. They will follow my aspirations." And exactly 100 years after my grandmother made that decision in 1914 as a 14-year-old, my daughter graduated Master of Law, named after her, at Harvard University. And her thesis was on how mātauranga Māori informs regulatory change in the resource management space. Tell me that was a coincidence. Tell me that's not an ancestral plan. Tell me it didn't take 100 years and 4 generations to get us from Nuhaka to Harvard and back home to carry on the work that is the legacy of our tipuna. And then we come in the ninth principle to homelessness. Kainga kore. Homelessness is a design principle of the state. Homelessness is a design principle of the politics of colonisation, of epistemological racism, of historical disconnectedness, and of structural violence. Homelessness is not a social fluke. Next slide, please. Theorising intersectionality in Aotearoa, just walked through some of the key principles, and the work is available online if you would like to go to the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness website to read the full report. But we honour the beautiful sisters, and I could only fit a few into this wonderful graphic, but we honour the wahine tō in Aotearoa, leading the way always leading the way for us to be able to speak to the world, whether through theory, through research, through activism, through conscientisation in our own terms, from the bottom up. Papatūānuku is the paradigm, our ability to speak to global forces through our own social structure, knowledge, philosophies, and our activism over generations through our own whānau, and then connecting wider into political movements, is how we are able to stand as Wāhine Māori and have a conversation about intersectionality, the way in which multiple overlapping features impact on mana wahine and impact on Māori women's lives in a way that they don't impact on others around them, and why mana wahine is the frame to understand all women's issues in Aotearoa, because if we can't start with a personal analysis of what's happening with Wāhine Māori, then we will never be fully inclusive of the whole experience of colonisation in Aotearoa. Last slide, please. So this is the tool, and you will see there's a big yellow lightning bolt through the middle, and that lightning bolt in this tool is Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi. I'll leave these slides with you, go through them at your own time, we've run out of time, but what that lightning bolt does is that it makes it utterly central to this work that the machinery of government itself is where structural inequality has been designed into the experiences of Wāhine Māori in Aotearoa. And what that's meant historically is that whereas some people can benefit from compound interest, how lucky they are to have the interest over generations that they can benefit from in their lives, we have had to live with the impact of compound impact, racism, structural inequality, sexism, and epistemological racism. We don't get compound interest, we get the compound impact of devastation. And the point of this work is, if inequality is man-made and can be designed into the public policy system of Aotearoa, then inequality can be designed out. And likely it will be women leading that design, and hence the Papatūānuku paradigm. Te Tiriti o Waitangi opened the door to colonisation. Papatūānuku is our platform for resistance and resiliency to all of the women and the people who are their allies and supporters, who honour Papatūānuku, who walk in her ways, making us clearly examples in the modern world of taonga tuku iho. Tēnei ngā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa.
Ngā mihi, Kathie, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, ngā mihi nui to our speakers. I'll now draw this session to a close. Apologies everyone for going a little bit over time, but I'm sure you'll all agree that that we just had to do it to hear these wonderful speakers. So thank you one and all. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, in terms of the conference in the next 5 days or 4 or 5 days. Some wonderful kōrero to uplift everyone's Māori for the rest of the day. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.